Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So I do want to go ahead and welcome you. This is Dining with Diabetes. Dining with Diabetes is a national program that was actually originally developed by West Virginia, and it was adapted by the National Extension for Dining with Diabetes, and now we, University of Kentucky, also use it. So I know we introduced ourselves before, but since we are now recording, I'm going to go ahead and do it again. My name is Mandy Broderick. I am the Lewis County Family and Consumer Sciences Extension Agent for the University of Kentucky, and I am going to be teaching this class with Olivia Ferris, who is the agent in Lawrence County. Now, the goal is for us to meet the next 4 Wednesdays virtually. Obviously, this is an in-person class, but we are also we're gonna have the 4 weeks, and then we're gonna have a 3-month follow-up. Now, for you all to sign up for this class, you actually should have went ahead and filled out the pre-survey. Hopefully all of you answered the questions on that. If you didn't, that's fine. But the survey that you filled out whenever you filled out the Qualtrics form, you're going to actually get that again 3 months from now. And Olivia and I, we talked before this class, and we've actually decided that anyone that returns that post 3-month survey to us, we're going to send you a cookbook in the mail. So you are going to actually get something, pretty tangible out of it. So keep that in mind, 3 months from now when you get an email from us, please fill that out. So during this class, you're actually going to learn what it means to eat well with diabetes. You're going to learn how to focus on different aspects of choosing a healthy diabetic meal plan, because I know a lot of times that's one of the things that even non-diabetics struggle with. How do I eat healthy? How do I make better choices for myself? Now, keep in mind that this program, it's not intended to provide actual prescriptions for meal planning. We can't tell you how to adjust your insulin if you're taking that. We can't give you any recommendations for medications. We are strictly here to provide you information about basically living a healthier lifestyle geared towards people with diabetes, but we are not medical doctors. We cannot, prescribe you anything. We cannot do anything like that. So please keep that in mind. Throughout this program, we do have a variety of goals that we want to try and meet. So we want you to learn about diabetes and the relationship to nutrition and physical activity. We want to talk about diabetes self-management. We want to, well, normally, I should have actually taken this out. In an in-person class, we would taste test diabetes-friendly recipes. Unfortunately, there's no way, through a Zoom call, I can let you taste things. I wish there was. Somebody invent that and you'll be rich. We're going to learn healthy cooking techniques. We're going to gain confidence about diabetes management, and we're also going to interact with people. I know really with any disease or any kind of thing going on in people's lives, one of the best ways to get through it is to talk to people that are going through similar situations and interact with them. So even though we can't meet face to face, the cool thing about Zoom is, which you probably noticed even before this class started here when we were talking, please interact with people. Don't be afraid to post a question in the chat box. We are going to be watching that. Yeah. So let's go ahead and dive into specifically what are we going to do today. So this is the first session of 4. And we're going to be learning about how insulin and glucose interact in the body. We're going to look at the different types of diabetes. We're going to look at some of the different terms that doctors and other physicians use to describe diabetes. And we're also going to talk a little bit about the emotions that diabetes brings. Anytime, and it doesn't even have to be like when you're diagnosed with a disease, it's a very emotional thing. Oftentimes you're kind of overwhelmed. You're thinking, well, what do I do now? Where do I go from here? And we're going to talk a lot about how we can help overcome that. Okay, so diabetes. If you're watching this later on Facebook, even if you don't have it, chances are you have heard of diabetes. There are over 30 million people in the United States that have now been diagnosed, and it is definitely a public health crisis. So there are now more than 100 million US adults are actually now living with diabetes or pre-diabetes, according to a new report by the CDC. So that report was from 2015. Okay, it actually says here there is 9.4% of the US population that has diabetes. That's incredible. I had to take a double look at that. That is a lot of people, you all. So this is not something that's just in, your town, your family. This is something that's definitely a public health crisis across the nation. Diabetes can also be really confusing. So I actually want to take a moment here, and I'm going to ask the class, what is diabetes? What is it to you? You can go ahead and type that out in the chat box, and I'll check back over here in a second. So just answer the question, what is diabetes? I'm curious to know what you think it is. I hear some of you typing. So
And
while
if
you all
you're
are typing,
watching this, oh, sorry.
go ahead, Olivia. Sorry.
If you're watching this later on Facebook, go ahead and type that in the comment section below because we would like to hear what you have to say also.
Oh, yeah, good idea. All right, so we have one here. The pancreas does not function properly. Okay, another answer, high blood sugar. Okay, both of those are correct. All right, we have another one, an autoimmune disease that impacts almost every aspect of your life. That's a really good answer. And yes, it does impact almost every aspect. Insulin resistance. Oh, okay. So you all know your stuff. For me, a type 1, it means testing my blood sugar several times a day and wearing an insulin pump. It means for me that I have no say in this disease. You've had it for 25 years. Wow. Wow. And we're actually going to talk a lot about that later on. We're going to talk about the differences in type 1, type 2. Okay, so you all, it seems like just from your answers to that question, you do have a general idea of what diabetes is. But just, in case anybody's watching this later, or maybe if somebody's in here that wants a better idea of what diabetes is, the clinical definition it's when you have excess glucose in your blood, either because the pancreas has stopped making insulin or glucose is not being absorbed by the cells. So like I said a second ago, we're going to talk about the two different kinds of diabetes later. A lot of people, they often feel really confused about their diabetes. It's really hard to learn what to eat, why your blood sugar is high or low, and sometimes, the blood sugar changes randomly and it doesn't have a good reason, to be high or low. And then you also have new medications. It's really important that you talk to your healthcare provider once you're diagnosed with it to really learn what all these different things mean for you. So a lot of you have said that you do have diabetes, but for a lot of individuals, I feel like the word diabetes is almost sometimes even confusing. So if you look at the slide here, these are often, terms and sayings that you'll hear people say. I have a touch of sugar. My sugar's a little high. I have pre-diabetes. What do these things even mean? Well, when doctors test for diabetes, they're actually measuring the glucose in your blood. And a lot of people call glucose blood sugar. If the results of the blood test indicate that your glucose levels are above normal, some people will say that your sugar's high, that you have a touch of sugar, or a lot of people, I know people in my family that have been told already they have pre-diabetes. So if you have a doctor that uses any of these words and you're ever confused by them, ask for an explanation. For some people, you're going to be able to bring your blood glucose levels back to normal just by changing your eating habits, by exercising, losing a little bit of weight. But for some people, you're going to have to, look at using insulin, and that's really going to be a case by case situation. But no matter what, type 1 or type 2, for a lot of people, if you have diabetes, you can control your blood glucose through a balance of diet, exercise, and medication. Now, we actually talked a little bit about this before the presentation started. Diabetes, it often comes with very strong feelings, right? So for some people, they get that diagnosis and they're like, oh, this is no big deal. This is fine. For some people, they're going to be very worried and scared, overwhelmed. That actually says empowered, angry, doomed, or relieved. And you're probably wondering, who on earth would feel empowered or relieved once they receive a diagnosis like that? Well, for some people, they've felt, for lack of a better term, wrong for a while. Like they know something's wrong with their body. So sometimes getting that diagnosis is almost a relief because it's like, okay, this is what's wrong. We can start working to fix this now. For some people, they're going to have symptoms before they're diagnosed. For some people, they're not going to know. They're not going to have any symptoms. We had an example earlier of somebody who found out they were diabetic when they were pregnant. That actually happens quite a bit. They've never been screened for it before. They get the screenings when they're, during their pregnancy, and then all of a sudden they realize they have diabetes and they never knew it before. No matter what feelings you have when you get the diagnosis, please know they're all normal. Okay, we actually had someone here say that they had no symptoms. Okay, and that's, like I said, a lot of people that happens to them. The people in my family that have been diagnosed with prediabetes, a lot of them, they don't feel any different. And in some ways, that's actually scary. To me, that would make me feel scared, the fact that something like that's happening and you just wouldn't know. But all of those feelings are definitely normal. And attending or watching classes like this are actually one of the best ways that you can, get some much needed support. You can get some new recipes and you can make friends that are going to help you get through it. Okay, so at this point, we're going to start to get a little scientific, because, we definitely want to know why this is happening to our bodies. And I think that's important. So the two big factors with diabetes here are glucose and insulin. So glucose is your blood sugar. All the food that we eat has carbs in it, right? Protein and fat, but most important here are the carbs. So whenever we eat foods with these carbohydrates, they're going to break down into smaller particles, and ultimately they're going to end up as glucose or simple sugars. So when people say they have, high blood sugar, they're technically correct. Glucose is a blood sugar. Carbohydrates are the foods that influence blood glucose the most. Now let's talk about insulin. Insulin is a hormone that is made by the pancreas. It's necessary to allow glucose to leave the blood to enter the cells. This occurs every time you eat and is necessary to keep your body fueled. So basically, for an example, insulin is the key that opens the door. To use that glucose, we have to get it out of our bloodstream and inside the cells. Most of our cells need a little help moving that sugar from the blood, and that's the role of insulin. It is the key to open the door. When it's not present, the glucose stays in your blood. So whenever doctors are actually testing, your blood, your urine, they can look for abnormally high levels of that glucose, and that's often a pretty good sign that something's going on. All right, so here we are with the two different types, and it seems like just from talking to the people that are here while this is live, it seems like we have a good mix of both types in here. So the most common types of diabetes are type 1 and type 2. The difference is whether or not your pancreas is making insulin. So with type 1, your pancreas is not making enough insulin, so you usually have to take it by injection. Without the insulin, your cells can't absorb the fuel from glucose. As we talked about in the last slide, it's kind of like the door can't be opened because the key's not there. You've lost the key, so there's no way to get it out. The glucose stays in your blood, and it can actually damage your kidneys and other organs too, because having too much glucose there's too much glucose being circulated and it's not being excreted. Diet and exercise can help control type 1 diabetes and the amount of insulin that's needed. This used to actually be called juvenile diabetes because it was more commonly developed in youth. Approximately 5% of people with diabetes have type 1. Now, we don't call that juvenile diabetes anymore because we do know that, sometimes you develop this as an adult. So we don't really use that term anymore, but some of you may have heard it called that in the past. So next up is type 2. Now, type 2 diabetes, there's an adequate amount of insulin that is produced in this, but the cells are resistant to letting the glucose enter. So imagine that the insulin, it's got the key, it's trying to unlock that door, but the door's stuck for whatever reason. The pancreas, it's going to continue to make insulin, and it's going to make you hungry, it's going to make you thirsty, but your glucose levels are still going to go up and up and up. It also appears that being overweight can contribute to this cell resistance, but a lot of times dropping just like 10% of your weight can actually really improve your blood glucose levels. Of course, increased exercise can also help with weight loss and blood circulation and glucose absorption. Doctors often recommend these behavior changes before prescribing medication. Actually, I know before we started this class, a lot of you were talking about things you tried before, and some of you had lost weight. Whenever you do those things and they don't work, doctors will often turn to prescriptions. And that's fine. Some people have to have the prescriptions, some have to have the medications, but usually the healthier lifestyles is the first course of action. Type 2 diabetes is actually being diagnosed at younger ages, and this type of diabetes is no longer being called adult onset. So remember, type 1 used to be called juvenile onset. Type 2 used to be called adult onset, and now we know that, adults or children can get either type. About 95% of people with diabetes have type 2. I know the people in my family that, that have had diabetes. It's been mostly type 2. However, I went to school with somebody who had type 1 diabetes. They found out when they were a child. It doesn't really matter if you're an adult or you're a child. You can end up with either type. Complications of uncontrolled diabetes. So whenever diabetes is uncontrolled, the extra glucose or sugar in your blood can damage a lot of different things in your body. Just a few of these symptoms are nerve pain, blindness, heart disease and stroke, kidney failure, sexual dysfunction, or loss of limbs. And I know if you went to a doctor or if you pulled up, from a reputable source, a list of like complications from diabetes, it is much longer than this. But these are some of the most common ones that you're going to see. Now, A lot of people, once they're diagnosed with diabetes, they just assume that they're automatically going to end up with all these complications, right? So they just automatically assume, well, all these bad things are going to happen to me. But complications, they don't have to happen. So if you actually take control of those blood glucose numbers and you're going to, go and eat a healthier diet, you start exercising, you take your medications as they're prescribed, you can really limit the complications related to diabetes in most situations. People are living longer now with diabetes than ever before. And people with type 2 diabetes, sometimes they need to take insulin since their pancreas isn't functioning correctly. But a lot of these things you can work with your doctor to make sure that these complications don't happen. So, with that being said, it's obviously important to work with your doctor, but how does your doctor even really monitor stuff? We're going to talk about that later. Physical activity. So, physical activity is not going to cure diabetes, but it can definitely improve your health and help with diabetes control. So it has many important health benefits. And for those of you watching this later, even if you don't have diabetes, physical activity is good for everyone, across the board. But physical activity, specifically for diabetics, it's going to help you move the glucose into your blood cells without insulin. So the larger the muscles that are moving, the more glucose they will use. So what I mean by that is, let's say that you are, I don't know, going on a hike, right? You're using way more muscles and you're having a higher heart rate and you're basically doing more, what's the word? More intense, there we go, intense physical activity. That's going to move more glucose compared to if you were, let's say, just doing like arm curls with a small dumbbell. So the bigger and the more muscles you use, the more glucose you're going to move out of your body. So it's also going to strengthen your muscles, including the heart. Activity that you do on your feet strengthens the muscles that can keep you from falling. It's also going to strengthen muscles that protect your bones and make them stronger. Something that's really not even related to diabetes, but physical activity is also going to reduce your stress level. And I know right now we're actually having this class, because of coronavirus. It's a very stressful thing. So exercise can even, help decrease stress levels from that. It's going to make you healthier overall. It's going to make you more likely to fight off infections. For many people, physical activity is going to improve emotional health and decrease depression. Honestly, anything that I've said here, those are all great things. We should all be exercising more. So how much physical activity should you be getting a day? So really, we recommend about 30 minutes per day of moderate activity. So what is moderate activity? That's going to be like a brisk walk. For example, like if you were about to miss your bus and you were walking really fast to catch it, that is moderate activity. Other examples of moderate exercises could include swimming, riding a bike, hiking, housework, and gardening. I know housework, if you get up and you're moving a lot, you can really get your heart rate up doing that. The 30 minutes can also be broken up into small 15-minute periods, and you feel like you don't have enough time to just say, I'm going to exercise for 30 minutes. If your kid takes a nap or if you get a break at work and you've got a 10-minute break, use that 10 minutes to exercise. Go for a walk around the building. So the 30 minutes per day can be split up. 150 minutes per week is the ultimate goal that we want to work towards. So more activity than 30 minutes a day is even better. So if you've got time to do more, there's absolutely no harm in that. So how do doctors monitor and manage your diabetes? In the picture here, you're actually going to see smoke. And when there's a smoke, there's fire. So these are actually your smoke alarms that you see here. So your A1c, your blood pressure, your cholesterol, your EGFR, your dilated eye examination, your dental examination, and your feet. Those things indicate when there's a problem in the early stages. So that's why it's really important to monitor these. The more that these are monitored, the sooner that you can catch something before you get one of those bad complications. So we're going to talk a little bit more about each of these tests. The first one here is hemoglobin A1c. So this is actually just a measure of how much sugar is attached to the red blood cells in your body. When sugar attaches to red blood cells, it also attaches to other proteins in the body, such as the proteins inside your blood vessels. It can take 3 to 4 months to change. So a lot of people, they'll go get their A1c levels done. They'll go back a month later and they'll say, oh, well, I've been eating healthier. Why are my A1c levels still the same? That's because your A1c is pretty much a snapshot of a 3 to 4 month period, right? So it's going to take longer to show your results. People who have diabetes should really try to maintain A1C values of 7% or less. People who do not have diabetes usually have 5% or less. So the higher your blood sugar levels, the more hemoglobin you're going to have with sugar attached in your bloodstream. And that's why that A1C level is going to go up. If your A1C is too high, here are some things you can do to bring that down. You can follow a meal plan. You can take medications. Like I said before, not everyone's going to need medication, but for a lot of people, it may be the only way to get their blood sugar levels down. And it's just helpful across the board. You can also test your blood sugar, especially after meals. A lot of people don't realize just how high their blood sugar can get right after they eat a meal. If your A1C is too high, increasing the amount of physical activity through the day will also lower your blood glucose because cells need the glucose for fuel, and it improves your circulation. So we talked about, the A1C is kind of what the doctor looks at to make sure that your diabetes is under control over a long period of time. But what about, short term? How can we as individuals monitor our blood sugar without the help of a doctor? Well, that's where, it's going to come into monitoring your blood sugar by sticking your finger. So a lot of people are going to do this daily at home. Some people can do it once a day. Some people are going to do it multiple times a day. Some people, even every time they eat something, they have to check their blood sugar. So keeping it under control, your blood sugar under control, is the key. Monitoring the level before a meal and about 2 hours after the start of a meal will let you know if you are successful in controlling your blood sugar. If you're using insulin, some people can adjust the amount of insulin as directed by your doctor. Do not self-diagnose or adjust your insulin unless your doctor has approved this approach. And this, like I said earlier when we started, Olivia and I, we are teaching this class. We're very, very knowledgeable about the things in this, but we're not doctors. We cannot diagnose you. We cannot treat you. It's important to talk to your doctor if you want to adjust any of the medications or insulin that they've prescribed you. So your blood sugar levels, those are going to vary from day to day, and they're often affected by whatever it is that you ate. So it's also going to be affected by what you ate, your physical activity, stress can actually change your blood sugar levels, and all kinds of other factors. Don't get discouraged if your numbers are not consistent. Just talk to your doctor about it if they're consistently high or consistently low. Every once in a while it's normal to have a high read or a low read, but if it's something you're getting constantly, that's when you need to talk to your doctor. Blood pressure. So blood pressure is simply a measure of how hard your heart has to work to pump blood through your body. Whenever your blood pressure is high, your heart has to work a lot harder. And whenever your blood pressure is low, or lower, it works a lot less. So if your blood pressure is not on target, meal planning, physical activity, and maintaining a healthy weight can help with these. There are also medications, just like there are medications for your blood sugar, there are medications for your blood pressure, and they can help control that. If anyone is a smoker, that is probably one of the biggest things that you can do to help reduce your blood pressure is to quit smoking. You can work with your doctor to try and get a plan for how to do that. It's better to have your blood pressure checked by a professional as opposed to like a machine, in like a grocery store, maybe a machine that you have at home. The machines in the grocery store and here I know I have one at home, but think about it. Do we ever check to make sure those are accurate? I know I don't. I've never checked the machine I have here to make sure it's accurate. So it's better to do that, with a trained medical professional to make sure it is correct. You should have your blood pressure checked at every single doctor's office visit. The American Diabetes Association's goal is for diabetics to have a blood pressure of 140/90. Now, for a normal person without diabetes, most of you probably know 120/80 is what you should shoot for. For some people, their natural blood pressure is going to be a little lower, for some a little higher, but for a diabetic, you really want to have under 140/90. And then your personal healthcare provider might also have a different goal. Keep that in mind too. If your blood pressure is too high, you can increase your physical activity. Like I said before, one of the best things you can do if you're a smoker is just to stop smoking. You could also lose a little weight. Losing 5 to 7% of your current weight will make a huge difference in blood pressure. If you're on medication to lower blood pressure, take it as instructed, whether or not you feel like you need it. A lot of people I know, they'll get the prescriptions, to control their blood sugar or to control their blood pressure. They'll get it under control, and then they'll think, oh, well, the problem's fixed. I don't need to take these medications anymore. And that's really not true. You have to continuously keep taking those in order for them to be effective. You can lower your intake of salt by eating fewer canned and processed foods. One of the biggest tips I give to people, even in just a general nutrition class, because as Americans, as a country, right, we eat a lot of salty food. I'm thinking about, French fries, any kind of fast food, processed food, it's loaded with salt. But one of the biggest tips I give people, if you're cooking at home, a lot of people will keep like a salt and pepper shaker there on the table. And if it's there in front of them, they almost always reach for it and use it. Just take the salt shaker off your table, because 9 times out of 10, if it's not there in front of you and you don't see it, a lot of people, even like hardcore like salt addicts, they'll just forget about it, and they'll start eating their food. So that's one of the biggest tips I can give you for that, is just, take the salt shaker out of sight, out of mind, I guess is the best way to explain that. Kidney function. So I know with diabetes, we're mainly talking about like your pancreas and how it malfunctions. But as we kind of said before, diabetes is a disease that's going to affect almost every major system in your body. And the kidneys is definitely one of those. So one of the serious complications of uncontrolled diabetes is kidney damage. High blood sugar destroys the small blood vessel. Oops, sorry. Hit the wrong button. It destroys the small blood vessels that filter our blood to remove impurities. So doctors, how on earth do they even know if your kidney's functioning correctly? So they actually use the glomerular filtration rate. So that's that GFR, or the eGFR is what you'll see it abbreviated as. And that's a test to make sure your kidneys are working the way they should. So specifically, that test is looking at how much blood passes through each glomeruli per minute in your kidneys. So it's a filtration rate, right? So if it's working like it should, that filtration rate will be good. If it's not, that filtration rate is going to be off. Microalbumin is also used to indicate whether your kidneys are working correctly, but more recently, they don't try to use that as much. The GFR is more accurate than the urine test, but you may find that your provider, still uses the microalbumin test, which is fine. But checking for kidney damage should be done once a year. Cholesterol. Now, I know this is a problem for a lot of people, even those that don't have diabetes. So whenever your LDL cholesterol is bad or too high, basically what happens, and you can see it in the picture here, is that it's going to start to stick to those arteries in your body, and it's going to build up, causing your blood vessels to become more narrow, and the blood basically can't get through as easy. And this often causes a heart attack or a stroke. Even if you don't end up with a heart attack or a stroke, having that plaque in your arteries is going to lead to damage in your tissues, and that's going to damage the tissues in your kidneys, your feet, your eyes. You get the picture. It's pretty much everything in your body, every artery, blood vessel in your body, it's going to have this plaque in it. And that can also lead to blood clots in the brain that can break off at any point in your body, travel to your heart, your brain, have a heart attack, a stroke. It can cut off circulation to your legs. All these events can be fatal. So the cholesterol is definitely something that you want to keep under control. If your cholesterol is too high, you can, once again, you see a trend here, stop smoking. You can reduce weight. You can increase your physical activity. You can eat less solid fats and sugars, take medications as prescribed, and follow up with your doctor. Now, a lot of these probably sound familiar, right? That's because a lot of these, they're intertwined. All these things are intertwined. If you smoke, it's going to raise your blood pressure. It's going to raise your cholesterol. It's going to damage your arteries. All these things are often related. Eye and foot exams. So the blood vessels in your eye and in other places in your body are just like the ones, in the other places in your body. So if you're building up that cholesterol, if your blood pressure is high, it's not just going to damage the large vessels. It's especially going to damage the small ones. So in your eyes, you have very tiny blood vessels. And this damage to your eye is actually called retinopathy. There are no physical symptoms with retinopathy. Treatment can actually help slow the eye disease if it's found early. So that's why it's very important to make sure you're going to your eye doctor and having your annual eye exams. You should also be doing a foot exam. So this can actually, for some of you, I know I'm not very flexible. Looking at the bottom of your foot may not be the easiest thing in the world. Whatever we usually tell people in our in-person classes is actually, I even give them away. Little handheld mirrors. You can sit one of those on the floor and use to check the bottom of your feet. So why do you want to do this? Well, oftentimes when you have this nerve damage and you have this blood vessel damage and you have poor circulation in your limbs, you start to lose the sensations in like your fingertips or in your feet. So basically what can happen is if you're walking around, and I know I have a horrible habit of it, right? If I need something from my car outside, I won't put shoes on. I'll just walk to the car. But if you're a diabetic and you can't feel your feet, you could have a huge sore on your feet and you would have absolutely no idea. So it's important to make sure you're looking at the bottom of those feet to make sure that you don't have any of those going on. With a diabetic, or whenever you're a diabetic, especially those cuts and sores, they don't heal as good. So if something like that on your foot gets out of control, it can actually cause you to end up losing your limb. So it's very serious. Um, it's, I said it was important to make sure you know that you're checking your feet, but one of the biggest other tips I can give you is just don't go barefoot anywhere. Make sure you're having some kind of socks on, some kind of protection on your feet, because those sores on your feet can get out of control very, very quickly. Now, let's say you go to the eye doctor, right? And there ends up being problems with your eye examination. Nobody wants to lose their eyesight. I know I don't want to. I doubt you do either. So protecting your eyes, to do that, you're going to have to control your diabetes and blood pressure and to stop smoking. Once again, a lot of the same things. Dental care. Dental care. Now, this is one that often surprises people, but remember, we're talking about all those small blood vessels in your body. So guess what? It's not just your eyes. It's not just the big arteries, not just your feet. There's blood vessels in your gums. And for those of you who don't floss regularly, you're probably reminded of that pretty frequently. It's recommended for people without diabetes to also visit a dentist once or twice a year. So diabetes impairs the blood circulation in your gums. So people with diabetes are twice as likely to have gum disease. So it's really important to make sure that you're going and getting that checked out. So all in all, if you take away nothing else from this, please know that with diabetes, it's really you and your doctor as a team. You want to keep your appointments. You want to take your medications, follow a diet plan, and talk to a dietitian or a diabetes educator. Include that exercise in your day. Ask questions and report problems, and address smoke alarms so they don't develop into diabetes complications. And remember, those smoke alarms are things like your A1c levels. Those are your blood pressure, your cholesterol. Those are all warning signs before things get bad. If you have any questions or problems, you should always talk to your doctor. They need your input to help create a plan for you that works, and also to address these smoke alarms so that they don't develop into those severe complications later on. Also, please remember you are not alone. There are 30 million other Americans with diabetes. You are not the only one. If you need somebody to talk to about it, chances are you can find somebody. You can find somebody in this class. Every single small step in the right direction towards controlling your diabetes is a good one. This could be something as simple as learning to count carbohydrates, or checking your blood sugar more, regularly, or starting to exercise. All of these things are steps in the right direction to controlling your diabetes. Now, I know today we more specifically talked about, what diabetes is, why it happens, the different types of diabetes, how they monitor it. This presentation is a little bit more clinical. Now, the other three presentations, we're actually going to get a lot more specific about how, things you can do to control your diabetes. Now, each week, one of the things that we are going to do is we're going to set a SMART goal. Now, for some of you, you've probably heard of a SMART goal before. Some of you haven't. So what the heck is a SMART goal? In case you don't know, a SMART goal is something that is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. So let me give you an example of that. So let's say we're going to set a specific goal. So that could be, I will check my blood sugar before meals and 2 hours after meals to control my blood sugar. Something that would be measurable would be, I will write down my blood sugars in a log. So then you're measuring it. So you set a specific goal. You said what it was going to be. Now you're measuring it. You're writing your blood sugars down. Attainable. So that would be something like bringing my supplies with me and setting an alarm for blood sugars to test my blood sugar after my meal. So now you're making sure that you can actually do the goal that you set. Relevant. So an example of that is, this goal will help me gauge my diabetes control and show areas where I can improve. So the relevant step, it kind of shows why you should be doing the goal. And timely. The goal that you set should be time bound. So an example of this, I will log my blood sugars on one weekday and one weekend day within the next week. So you're setting that goal for a week, and that basically helps you just stick to it, right? It helps you stick to it. All right, so what I want each of you to do before next week is think about one goal that you can set for your diabetes. What can you do that is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely that you can do to help get your diabetes under better control? Now, like I said before, a lot of the stuff I talked about today was more clinical, more specific, like what is diabetes. Starting next week, we're really going to get down to more of the food portion, right? Because diabetes, a lot of it revolves around food. We're specifically going to be talking about carbohydrates and sweeteners. So that is actually, I think, what is next Wednesday, which is August the 12th. August the 12th at noon is the next time we'll see you all. So with that, I think I've said everything I needed to say, everything I'd planned to say. Does anybody have any questions, comments, concerns? Feel free to go ahead and post those in the chat box now. All right. We good? I always like it when people are quiet because I assume that means I covered everything. All right. Olivia, do you have anything to add or?
Well, thank you all for joining us today. I hope that, I know there's all kinds of, I feel like noise out there when we're dealing with a chronic illness. So I'm hoping that, we're a couple of friendly faces that can kind of make that noise be more direct and helpful to you. If you think of anything between now and next week, you have our email address, like please feel free to reach out to us. And even if we don't know your specific answer, we will do our best to find an answer for you. I'm really excited to be hosting next week. It should be a really interesting one. When you start talking about, carbohydrates and sweeteners and food labels and what should I be looking at, sometimes that's very confusing. So I'm going to be excited to shed a little bit more light on that. So please join us next week. And thank you all again for joining us today. We hope you learned something.
Yeah, hopefully you did. I know that was a lot to absorb. But, like I said, we are going to be posting this to Facebook later. So even if you missed it initially, you can go back, you can rewatch it again. There's no worries about that. I could also, I don't know, should I send the PowerPoint maybe, Olivia? Should I do that or what do you think?
Would you all like that? I saw a few people taking notes. Would you like a copy of the PowerPoint slides?
Yeah, okay. We've got some people saying yes. Okay, so I'll do that right after I end this. But okay, I do want to go ahead, like Olivia said, thank you all for joining us today. I know I had fun. And we will hopefully see you again next week. Olivia will be teaching next week, but I'll still be here watching. But yeah, thank you for tuning in and hopefully we'll see you then.